Welcome to Asia Outlook. I'm Melody and I'm here to report the top stories from around Asia. August 6th marks the 75th anniversary of the world's first atom bomb attack. Survivors, relatives, and foreign dignitaries in the Japanese city of Hiroshima have been attending the commemoration with prayers and calls for world peace. CGTN Terence Terashima reports.
It has been scaled down to 1/10 of the past years. They have only set up about 880 seats this year, and it was by invitation only to prevent clusters in the ceremony. Many of the survivors and family members are elderly. Average age of survivors are 83 years old. So naturally, the city has taken every precautions to prevent infections among the attendants, as well as people gathering around the park where the ceremony is held. But there have been hundreds of people gathering outside in the streets, hoping to see the glimpse of the ceremony. This year marks the 75th anniversary, so many of those who has seen the tragedy of the war feels that this is a very important point to look back at the past tragedies. There have been fewer people to tell stories, not only in Hiroshima, but Nagasaki, Okinawa, and also the war itself. So survivors, especially elderly people, are asking not to let this past war tragedies forgotten and Japan to continue to promote peace.
Many lives were stolen after the atomic bomb. When I think about that, while I'm alive, in order to pray for peace, people who are alive need to know and study and teach our grandchildren.
A lot of the elderly are concerned at the direction Japan is heading at the moment. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe did not attend the memorial ceremony in Okinawa, but he will be attending a ceremony in Nagasaki on the 9th and the war memorial ceremony on the 15th. And elderly people are asking Prime Minister Abe to look back again and worry that he may be joining with U.S. into a wrong direction. So asking the government to mediate, but not to take sides with the U.S. aggressive stance.
In Sri Lanka, the ruling party has won a landslide victory in parliamentary elections with nearly 2/3 majority. This will give the Sri Lanka People's Front the power to make changes to the constitution. The party's candidate, Mahinda Rajapaksa, who's also the president's brother, is expected to be named the new prime minister of the country. A new cabinet with up to 30 ministers will also be appointed to next week. Rajapaksa's family has dominated Sri Lanka politics for nearly 2 decades. Vietnam has introduced tough measures to tackle a second wave of COVID-19 infections, 3 months after the country was believed to be virus-free. Its Southeast Asian neighbors are in varying stages of combating the disease. CGTN Martin Lowe has more.
It was held up as an example of best practice in tackling COVID-19. Vietnam imposed strict antivirus measures and closed its borders even before its first case was diagnosed. Infections were kept low and there were no deaths. There was no local transmission for more than 3 months. An airline pilot from the UK spent 2 months in a coma but recovered. But then everything changed. Vietnam has seen a rapid resurgence of COVID-19 with its first deaths and a spike of infections at the coastal resort of Da Nang after citizens were encouraged to resume domestic travel. Da Nang has been placed in total lockdown, but Vietnam says up to 800,000 visitors to the city have returned to other parts of the country in the past month, sparking fears new outbreaks could appear anywhere. Cases have been detected already in Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City among people returning from Da Nang. The UN has applauded a quick reaction to virus surges among Southeast Asian nations.
Containment measures have spared Southeast Asia the degree of suffering and upheaval seen elsewhere. Governments acted swiftly to battle the pandemic and avoid its worst effects, and regional cooperation has been robust across multiple sectors.
One of Vietnam's biggest public events, the Hue Festival, has been postponed until 2021. Contact tracing is rigorously enforced. This chart details the minute-by-minute movements of an infected person who visited a Ho Chi Minh shopping mall, so others can check if they were at risk.
The second wave of COVID-19 to hit Vietnam is a shock and a bitter disappointment. Health experts had been looking at the country as a blueprint for tackling the virus. Now everyone is wondering what went wrong.
Across Southeast Asia, there are major outbreaks in Indonesia and the Philippines, with death tolls of more than 5,000 and 2,000 respectively. The Philippines has just recorded its largest single-day increase, as the virus shows no signs of slowing. Elsewhere, Thailand, Singapore, Cambodia, Myanmar, Malaysia and Laos have all been able to report relatively low numbers. Martin Lowe, CGTN, Bangkok.
COVID-19 cases have surpassed 19 million globally, with more than 7,000 deaths. Almost half of the deaths came from the 4 worst hit countries: the United States, Brazil, Mexico, and the United Kingdom. The toll has been growing at a fast pace. The World Health Organization has called on other countries to work together to overcome the pandemic by insisting on science and solidarity.
No country has been spared. Low, middle, and high-income countries have all been hit hard. The Americas remain the current epicenter of the virus. No single country can fight this virus alone. Its existence anywhere puts lives and livelihoods at risk everywhere. It's never too late to turn outbreaks around, and many countries have done just that.
A special exhibition was held in Shanghai to commemorate the uniqueness of COVID-19. People can travel from loss and anger to meditation and joy in this exhibition called Circle of Quarantine.
Because 2020 has made sure that we will never forget it. But then also out of that time of isolation, these universal feelings that also connect us, hopefully we were able to take some insights. The virus was very disruptive, and oftentimes you're left feeling what next.
Thailand's prime minister is warning protesters not to create chaos after some called for reforming the constitutional monarchy. Prayut Chan-o-cha said parliament would consider their demands to amend the constitution. Hundreds of young protesters, many of them young students, have been gathering across the country calling for the dissolution of the parliament and new elections. Some broke a taboo by openly criticizing the monarchy, which is a crime in Thailand. The prime minister said a committee has been formed to discuss possible changes to the 2017 constitution drafted under the military's influence. Monsoon rains have caused major waterlogging throughout regions of India and massive flooding in villages across the country. See how Indians are trying to handle the situation and the government response to the crisis. Stay with us as we bring you more news on Asia Outlook. South Korean President Moon Jae-in has called for his scheduled summer holiday and is receiving daily briefings as weeks heavy rains and floods left at least 28 dead or missing. CGTN's Jack Barton has more from Yongin.
Small streams like this one in Yongin that often flow at a trickle are now small rivers, while the capital Seoul was temporarily cut in two over the past few days as major bridges crossing the Han River, which flows through the city, were closed down due to the rapidly rising floodwaters. Most of the closed bridges and roads in the capital managed to reopen as the rain paused for a short while in Seoul on Tuesday. However, flooding and resulting landslides have led to nationwide deaths, injuries, as well as damage to almost 1,500 public facilities and an equal number of private homes, farm buildings and vehicles. More than 5,700 hectares of farmland have been submerged, with critical infrastructure damaged, including highways, some of which have been completely swept away. So far, more than 1,000 people have had to flee their homes. Heavy rain alerts remain in place for the Greater Seoul area, which saw 300 millimeters of rain over the weekend, as well as half a dozen provinces, with heavy rainfall expected for at least another week. Some parts of the country have experienced up to 49 days of heavy rain since June 10. Experts say the weather conditions likely stem from global warming, as it's caused more ice and frost to melt, with the exposed land acting as an absorbing plate for sunlight. They say this has caused warm air to build up, pushing cold air currents towards Northeast Asia. President Moon Jae-in has called off his scheduled summer holiday to keep abreast of the crisis and is reportedly receiving daily briefings on the damage caused across the country by weeks of torrential rain. Jack Barton, CGTN, Yongin in South Korea.
More than 5,000 film production companies shut down in the first 4 months of this year nationwide, 1.7 times more than during all of 2019, according to leading financial news outlet Economic Daily. Under looming pressure, where will these film graduates go? CGTN Sun Si-ki has answers from Shanghai.
Action! The future creators just had a rude awakening. Impacted by the pandemic, the employment rate of film production graduates at Shanghai Vancouver Film School was sliced to about half from 70% in past years. But recent graduate Fu Yichao is making a bold choice. After his mini-film was nominated at this year's Shanghai International Film Festival, it emboldened him to start a company that makes short online series. He used to think his whole world is about movies, but he's changed.
I now think the online sector is going to do better. I was not initially a big fan of online videos. Many of the stuff on Douyin are of much lower quality than movies. But because of that, now might be the moment for professional filmmakers to enter this industry. We've spoken to some video viewing platforms about our series. Nobody has said yes, but nobody has rejected us either.
In first-year acting classes, the ghost of apprehension is creeping in.
I might take some summer jobs on film crews that have nothing to do with acting, just to learn more about how the industry works.
Not being married to any particular field might be the right strategy in this climate. The school says students who do not have a portfolio will run into problems, considering larger companies will mostly hire experienced professionals this year.
These recent graduates need to keep in mind that some small firms may opt to hire students that do have solid abilities, because it will be cheaper. Our students are geared towards filmmaking, but if they are willing to turn sideways and go to firms that produce online videos, they will find such jobs much easier to obtain.
Over at Shanghai Theatre Academy's Film and TV School, 50% of this year's graduating class went to companies somewhat related to film production, a plunge from the usual 70%. Some students had to be persuaded to take jobs that pay 5,000 to 6,000 yuan a month after tax. That is about 25% less than what they usually expect.
Most of these companies produce short videos for online retailers,
conduct live streams, or make commercials. Students are not finding the positions with the media giants like they did before.
We encouraged our professors to use their connections to find every job available. In general, employers are not as glamorous as before. Some are not exact matches with the student's major, so some kids feel disappointed. But I suggest they use this period of time to gain life experience and let it feed into their creativity. Ang Lee, for example, stayed quiet for 6 years after graduating, but his works, The Wedding Banquet and Eat, Drink, Man, Woman, quickly put him on the map.
Industry insiders expect the domestic film industry to take somewhere between 12 and 18 months to recover from the pandemic. Professors once again stressed that students learn from being in the heat of the action on film sets, not from sitting at home. Sun Siqi, ICS for CGTN, Shanghai.
A 300-year-old town that was submerged underwater to build a dam in the 1970s became visible again after drought caused the water to recede. Some residents say the town's resurfacing is a sign of hope amid the coronavirus pandemic. Japan is warning against any move to require its companies to pay for forced labor during World War II, calling it a quote-unquote serious situation. Meanwhile, the Korean assets of a Japanese steelmaker face liquidation after a ruling from South Korea's High Court. Let's take a listen.
The ruling by the Supreme Court of South Korea on the issue of former workers from the Korean Peninsula and the related judicial proceedings are a clear violation of international law. We have repeatedly pointed out strongly that, should this lead to any steps to seize assets, it would present a serious situation and must be avoided. We hope to strongly call for an early resolution. We will continue to take a resolute approach, taking into consideration all possible measures from the perspective of protecting legitimate economic activities of Japanese companies.
2 years ago, South Korea's Supreme Court ordered Nippon Steel to pay $88,000 each to 4 plaintiffs who worked at its mills during Japan's colonial rule of the Korean Peninsula. The court made a similar ruling on Japan's Mitsubishi Industries in November. Both decisions triggered a diplomatic spat between the two countries. Japan considers all wartime compensation issues settled by a treaty both countries signed in 1965.
Kokro Pamungkas calls himself the best spiritual healer in Indonesia. He's best known to soothe heartbreaks, cure illnesses, and help his clients attract abundance. Back in March, all of this changed as Indonesia was forced into strict coronavirus lockdowns. Many people chose to stay home and avoided the public at all costs. CGTN Silkina Aluwalia has more from Indonesia.
Cokro Pamungkas calls himself the best spiritual healer in Indonesia. For more than 20 years, Cokro has been known to soothe heartbreaks, cure illnesses, and help his clients attract abundance. He's made most of his income through people in his local community. But since Indonesia's strict coronavirus lockdowns, he's had to get creative with his business strategy.
Now I use Google Ads to reach my audience. Since I've done this, 60% of my clients are mostly the millennial generation between the age of 20 to 28 years old. I mostly conduct my rituals through text message, and this has skyrocketed my business. Since COVID-19, I can say my clientele has more than doubled.
These days, Cokro says his young clients are simply looking for blessings amid the pandemic. During these uncertain times, many healers are much more accessible. They use e-commerce platforms to reach their younger audiences. Online shoppers can use these websites to book alternative healers and buy their products. But it's easy to get caught up in the mysticism. It isn't unusual for the Indonesian public to seek the help of shamans even before doctors. But it's difficult for the government to regulate these practices. And in a country that takes religion very seriously, the government has been trying to legislate the supernatural. Back in 2019, Arsul Sani proposed to outlaw some of these practices he considered to be dark magic. He says in Islam, this is believed to be haram or sinful.
What we outlaw in the supernatural bill is those who publicly announce and market themselves as practitioners of dark magic with supernatural powers. It can be criminalized or charged with fraud under our criminal code bill. But once the act has been done, it is hard to charge them with any law because how could we prove it? It is almost impossible to regulate.
Indonesia's rich history steeped in magic will always have a place in its modern society. With the rise of technology, the government is working to get various ministries involved to strictly regulate these practices as a whole, to make sure the rituals performed both online and offline are safe. Sulkina Aluwalia, CGTN, Jakarta.
Numerous countries' response to the devastating blast has been swift and supportive. Funds and supplies are pouring in, and thousands are attending solidarity gatherings and raising the Lebanese flag in towns and cities to show support for the Lebanese. CGTN Stephanie Fried has more.
As crews dig through Beirut's rubble searching for survivors, scores of individuals and governments throughout the region are lending moral and material support. Numerous countries, including Lebanon's foe Israel, are prominently displaying the Lebanese flag. Vigils and gatherings organized throughout the region are mourning victims of Tuesday's blast, sending messages of solidarity.
We are sending a simple message to our brothers in Lebanon that we support them and feel their pain and their wounds.
Multiple tons of food, oil, and medical aid and rescue teams are arriving from Kuwait, Qatar, Egypt, Iraq, Jordan, Turkey, and Greece. Neighbor state hospitals are offering to absorb the overflow of wounded. The World Food Programme is pledging increased activity as food scarcity fears surge.
We will scale up our operation. We will continue to assist as many people as needed with emergency food assistance, of course, and we will find coping mechanism to maybe counter the fact that the Beirut port has been damaged.
Beirut's port, now in ruins, has been the country's main artery for importing food supplies to the nation's more than 6 million people. Online crowdfunding sites are raising millions of dollars for the approximately 5,000 injured and 250,000 now homeless Lebanese. Damage caused by Tuesday's explosion is estimated at $5 billion. Stephanie Fried, CGTN.
The Chinese government has rolled out policies to reverse the negative impact of COVID-19 on the domestic job market. The measures look to promote flexible employment and help rural migrants find work or start businesses.
In China, there are 83 million small and self-employed business owners, providing jobs for 200 million people. The figures were announced at a news conference Friday. But a lack of custom due to COVID-19 has made it difficult for many of them to pay their rent, and many have been forced to lay off employees. The country's top economic planner is now promising to help them survive and grow.
Self-employed business owners have faced most of the real difficulties during the pandemic. It is a top priority to help 83 million of them survive and develop in every way, as we strive to stabilize and guarantee employment.
In China, the government defines self-employed businesses and part-time jobs as flexible. The State Council has issued a series of policies to promote flexible jobs in the country.
We will guide people to set up small business entities, which require low investment and have the potential to get quick results with fewer risks. And we will support the opening of various shops by offering them loans, preferential taxes, and subsidies.
Another focus of the government is to promote jobs for rural workers, a group now standing at 290 million people. That's nearly 20% of China's entire population. Over 60% of them travel out of their hometown to work every year. By June, officials say 3% fewer migrant workers left their homes for work compared to the same period last year. But many were unable to find stable employment and decided to return.
We will do our best to stabilize employment by strengthening the support of accommodation and catering industries. We will prioritize development of service and labor-intensive industries, cultivating new economic development engines to expand jobs as much as possible.
The Chinese government is now encouraging workers in rural areas to work closer to home. By the end of July, 13 million new jobs were given to those who returned from big cities. 5% of these turned to new industries, such as live streaming sales. 吴国秀 CGTN, Beijing.
The parent companies of TikTok and WeChat have responded to U.S. President Donald Trump's latest moves. Tencent, which owns WeChat, says it is, quote, reviewing the order to get a full understanding, end quote. Tencent shares fell by nearly 10% following President Trump's announcement. Meanwhile, TikTok's parent company ByteDance says it will file a lawsuit to U.S. courts if it is treated unfairly. It also says the order was issued without any due process against the U.S. commitment to the rule of law. The company stresses that Trump's order is a bad example against a free and open market. There are more news coming on Asia Outlook, so make sure you're sticking around. The United Nations has warned that the COVID-19 pandemic has created the largest disruption of education systems in history. The crisis has affected nearly 1.6 billion young people in more than 190 countries, and the school closures are adversely impacting vulnerable communities the most. The study takes into account member countries' Human Development Index, or HDI, that looks at key indicators such as health, education, and living standards. The study says that in countries with a low HDI, the pandemic has driven 86% of children in primary education out of schools, compared with just 20% in countries with a higher development index. Worldwide, with more than 40 million children have missed out on early childhood education, and nearly 24 million are at a risk of dropping out of school because of COVID-19's economic impact. Indian influencers are struggling to re-establish themselves after the government banned about 100 Chinese apps from operating in the country. New app companies are trying to attract influencers to their platforms with lucrative deals, but worrying experts say the businesses are facing a long road to recovery. CGTN Ravinder Bawa has more from New Delhi.
Paras Tomar as an actor.
Paras Tomar, a journalist turned social media influencer, now has his own beauty and skincare brand. His entrepreneurial journey into the world of beauty began with short videos on social media platform TikTok. After TikTok was banned in India in June, influencers like Tomar, with over 3 million followers, are being chased by Indian apps that aspire to fill in the void.
So for a whole bunch of us, what actually happened is earlier we would probably get paid to do certain kind of videos for brands. But I think the way it suddenly shifted is that a lot of these platforms now want you to make whatever videos you want, but they want you to make sure that they upload at least 30-40 videos in a month. So from just the perspective of that value for some people, where they're being approached not by brands now, but by platforms, this is a great change.
India has banned more than 100 Chinese apps in the last 2 months, citing a threat to the country's sovereignty and security. Since then, Made in India apps are gaining momentum as the youth are addicted to short video format. The Indian app companies are luring content creators with enticing offers but failing to provide an experience equivalent to TikTok.
For these Indian applications, they're not enjoying the experience. They're not happy with what the content quality they have to offer, because almost everyone is using all these applications. But because all of them are expecting a payout from them, so I don't think it's feasible to keep doing this.
Experts say India has a long way to go to build an app ecosystem.
Nationalistic kind of sentiment that this ban has created may lead to a lot of such users of TikTok and other platforms to get onto the native apps also. But the functionality of the apps and the popularity of these apps will certainly decide how long they are going to stick to the platform.
According to some calculations, the top 100 influencers have suffered a loss of 1,200 million rupees due to the ban. Ravinder Bava, CGTN, Delhi.
And that's all we have for today's Asia Outlook on MI Radio. We'll be back next week. Until next time.